All righty. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our next installment of the Reliability 101 and 201 webinar series. Today, we've got one of our CIP cyber and physical security analysts, Ms. Rebecca Barber, here to discuss the foundations of a critical infrastructure protection program. Before we get started, we've got just a few things to go over. First, as always, is our antitrust admonition. I will spare you listening to me read it, but remind you that if you have any questions about the antitrust admonition, to please contact our general counsel. We're through the first week. We've got a couple of weeks left to go. A lot of great information was covered last week. If you'd like to find any of that, we have all of it posted to our training page at texasre.org. I've thrown a link up in chat for y'all. You can catch the presentation materials as well as the recordings of all those presentations, and we will get the presentation materials and recordings posted as we go through these. Today's presentation materials are already posted, so if you'd like to follow along, follow that link that I put down there and go into archived presentations. As you can see, next week we've got 2 sessions. On Wednesday, Texas RE will be closed for Juneteenth, and then on the last week, we've got sessions for Monday and Tuesday with a double header on the 25th, including the more recently posted 201 walkthrough through Align. Now, while we're doing all of this, the ERO Enterprise is also holding events of their own. NERC continues with their GADS Wind and Solar Template and Application Training. That's going to run through July. The Regional Summer Assessments webinar hosted by MRO will be on June 27th. And then on June 22nd, Reliability First will be hosting a technical talk with RF. As I mentioned to those of you who got here early, we will be using Slido for questions and answers. To get to Slido, go to slido.com or sli.do and enter today's participant code, which as usual is TXRE, or you can scan the QR code in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. While y'all are getting signed into that, I will at last stop talking and turn it over to our presenter, Rebecca Barber.
Thank you, Thad. So like Thad said, I'm going to be doing this talk on the foundations of CIP, or critical infrastructure protection. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Thad. So let's really get into what critical infrastructure is before we start talking about those protections. So as you can see here, there's going to be 16 total critical infrastructure sectors, and we're going to fall within the industry sector. So the energy sector. So the energy sector is what we like to call an enabling sector. It's what allows all of these other sectors to be able to effectively operate. Now, there are a few interdependencies. We rely on some of these, like transportation, communications, things like oil and gas. Those are definitely other sectors that we require to operate. But as far as all of these other ones, I would say that energy is definitely the most important and something that every single one of these relies on. Next slide, please. And so let's really talk about what the energy sector is. Now, for the purposes of this presentation, we're just going to be referring to it as the bulk electric system, or the BES. And so this is going to be a very high-level overview of what the BES is. So if we start here over at the generating station and then onto the generating step-up transformer, you'll see that these are highlighted in red, and this is just going to be your generation, your GO, generation owner, and generation operator functions. And then that moves on down the line over to this blue transmission section, those transmission lines. Those are going to stretch a long distance to be able to move that electricity. This is going to be your transmission owner and transmission operator functions. And then from there, it's going to move over to the substation step-down transformer to distribution. And from there, it's going to go over to the customers. That's going to be your distribution provider function. Now, typically within CIP, we generally just see those CIP standards apply within these red and blue sections here, the GOP and TOTOP functions. Now let's really start to get into what CIP is. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now, this is going to be a core concept for CIP, and so I'd really like to highlight this before we really start to move on. So, cyber assets is a NERC-defined term, and the definition is programmable electronic devices, including the hardware, software, and data in those devices. So, cyber assets can be things like what you're sitting at right now. A computer, a laptop, those are cyber assets. Maybe you're on a phone, that's definitely going to be a cyber asset. But some other examples could include things like servers, whether that's an application or data server, routers, firewalls, SCADA, um, as well as databases. Those would all fall within the cyber assets definition. Now, this is a very broad term on purpose because from here, this is where we get a smaller group that we call BES cyber assets. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now, BES cyber assets, at a very high level, they're defined as cyber assets that, if they're made unavailable or misused, would, within 15 minutes, could adversely impact one or more facilities, systems, or equipment, which would then affect the reliable operation of the bulk electric system, or BES. So some examples of BES cyber assets could be things like application or data servers, particularly for ICCP servers, human-machine interface workstations or HMI workstations. For example, that would be like what a operator at a control center would be sitting at. Those computers would be classified as an HMI machine. Data for acquisition interchange, those could be BES cyber assets, computer networking equipment, communication processing devices, as well as precision time devices. Those would all fall within, or rather could fall within, that BES cyber asset definition, so long as it meets particularly that 15-minute impact time, but it does have to have impact to the bulk electric system. Now, it's very important to clearly define what your BES cyber assets are, because those are then grouped into BES cyber systems. And this grouping is important because that's where protections and controls are usually applied, and then standards use those BES cyber systems for those requirements as well. Next slide, please. And now these are some different cyber assets. These are going to be cyber assets that don't quite meet that definition of a BES cyber asset, but are still very important due to their location and the function that they perform. Now, the first one we have here are protected cyber assets. So these are going to be cyber assets that are on the same network as BES cyber assets. They fall within what we call an ESP, or electronic security perimeter. They can be things like file servers, LAN switches, printers, though we generally don't like to see those on the same network as a BES cyber asset, digital fault recorders, emission monitoring systems. Those could all be protected cyber assets. Now, another is going to be electronic access control or monitoring systems, or ECMs. Those are going to be things like the easiest example I can give is a firewall. That is definitely going to be an ECMs. Some other examples are authentication servers, security event monitoring systems or SIMs, intrusion detection systems. Those would all fall within and be in ECMs. And then lastly, we have physical access control systems, or PACs. Those things are card systems, badge control systems. So think when I go into the office, I have a little card and I have to badge in to unlock the door and to be able to get in. That's going to be a PACs. Intrusion detection systems can also be a form of PACs, particularly on the physical side rather than the intrusion detection systems that are going to be more on the electronic side. So next slide, please. So now that we've laid that foundation, I'd like to go ahead and let's really get into what the CIP standards are. These are going to be the CIP standards that are enforceable as of today. Now, I can't go into too much detail for each of these standards here, otherwise we are just going to be here all day. I can talk on and on about particularly some of these, but I'm not going to make y'all sit through that. We do have reliability 201 presentations on some of these standards in particular. I do know one's going to be over CIP 7 on Monday. My coworker Jonathan is giving that presentation, so definitely be on the lookout for that. But at a very high level, so CIP 2 is going to go over BES cyber system categorization. So really what that does is it categorizes BES cyber systems into high impact, medium impact, and low impact. And then what that's going to do is really give you an idea or tell you what other standards are going to apply. So CIP3 kind of is two different parts. The first requirement deals with policy review by CIP management. And then requirement 2 really is what we call CIP Lite. It contains a lot of different pieces from these other standards, but it applies them specifically to low impact systems. Now, CIP 4 deals with personnel and training, so you have to do your background checks, you have to make sure that they're trained appropriately. CIP 5 deals with protections, electronic protections in place for the BES cyber assets, particularly that electronic security perimeter that I kind of mentioned earlier. CIP 6 deals with the physical security of BES cyber systems. CIP 7 deals with system security management. So really that's just the management of security appliances like firewalls that are protecting your BES cyber assets, deals with patching, that kind of thing. CIP 8 is going to be your incident reporting and response planning. So that's going to be your CSIRP, your cybersecurity incident response plan, as well as the testing of that plan. CIP 9 is going to be your your recovery plans for BES cyber systems. So that really deals with your backups, making sure that you can recover your systems in case of an event. So that kind of ties into CIP 8 a little bit. And then CIP 10 is configuration change management and vulnerability assessments. So that kind of goes into two parts there. Really what it is baselining your systems. You need to understand what your normal is to be able to properly monitor your systems. And that second part there is the vulnerability assessments. CIP 11 deals with information protection, particularly we kind of call it BCSI or BES cyber system information. That's one's kind of something that we're looking at quite a bit, and it will be mentioned a few different times throughout the rest of this presentation. CIP 12 deals with data between control centers, particularly the real-time assessment and monitoring data, the protections that are applied on
Rebecca, are you able to hear me? Or Matt, are you able to hear me?
Yes, and sorry, everybody. Give
So
us just a
sorry.
moment.
Am I back?
Yes, ma'am. We can hear
Yes,
you now, Rebecca.
can hear
Thank
you.
you. Sorry about that, everyone.
Thanks so much, guys. I don't know what happened, but I believe, what was the last thing you heard me talk about? Was it CIP 12?
Possibly.
I'll just reiterate one more time on CIP 12. So CIP 12 deals with data between control centers. So that's particularly real-time assessment and real-time monitoring data. And really what it deals with is the protections on that data as it's in transit between control centers. Next up, we have CIP 13, which deals with supply chain risk management. And so really what it is assessing the risks associated with products and services supplied by a vendor. And then we also have CIP 14, which is physical security. Now this is a little bit different from CIP 6. CIP 6 deals with the physical security for BES cyber assets or BES cyber systems. CIP 14 is a little bit more specific. It's more towards substations and things like the equipment that's within those substations. That's kind of the protections that are applied there. I also have here compliance guidance and the NERC glossary. These are both very important. Compliance guidance is kind of how you could implement these CIP standards on your own organization, and the NERC glossary is very important to these standards. What that is, there is a series of terms defined by NERC for the purposes of these standards. So for example, we said cyber assets earlier, and I defined that. That is specifically defined by NERC, and when we're looking at these standards, we audit based on that term. You could have your own definition if you wanted to, but we wouldn't consider that definition as we're auditing. It would just be the defined term. And I also want to highlight very quickly, so you'll see a whole bunch of these standards with a star next to them. Now these standards are getting updated very soon. So those updates are part of Project 2016-02, Modifications to CIP Standards. This has been a long time coming. If you could tell by the 2016, it has been 8 years in the works. I do believe it was recently passed to update these standards. Last I heard it's still pending regulatory filing, but the implementation date is going to be somewhere in 2026. And I bring that up because you may have already implemented, or maybe you're still implementing some of these CIP standards on your own organization. But it's very important to look towards the future to see what might be changing and what changes you're going to have to make. And speaking of going to the future, next slide, please, Thad. This is we're kind of looking at coming up. So first here we have virtualization. Now this is already here, but we're just going to see this increase more and more in the future. And kind of tying back to those updates to the standards that I talked about earlier, virtualization does play a big part in those updates. Specifically with CIP 5, I see a lot of changes there in relation to virtualization. Next thing is internal network monitoring. This is another big thing. This is going to be traffic within the network to detect and stop malicious traffic from moving from system to system. So it's going to prevent any malicious code from infecting other systems within the same network. Now, internal network monitoring might be a new CIP 15 standard. It's still in the works. Nothing's been official yet, but that could be coming sometime soon. And then finally, we have cloud computing. Kind of similar to virtualization, we have seen a lot of this already, but we expect to see the utilization of this continue to increase and then possibly even begin to branch out to host more services on cloud systems. Next slide, please. Get a drink of water here. So what other trends and or technologies do you think are going to become more widespread on the bulk electric system? My goodness, DES. Just kind of tying back to the previous slide, AI, that could be used. I think there's a lot of contention, a lot of back and forth on whether or not that is really going to be used. There's a lot of security concerns associated with AI, but it definitely poses a lot of benefits that could be used. That's definitely something that could be something we're moving towards. Cloud migrations, yeah, kind of talking back to those cloud computing. We are expecting to see a lot of that. DER is definitely a big one. There has been a lot of talks about DER. I see it mostly on the operations side, but I do think we might see some things on the CIP side for that. IoT, yeah, a lot of things are becoming that way. Solar and wind energy. I feel that's more on the operation side, O&P. And kind of relates also back down to DERs, which is distributed electric resources, by the way. I didn't define that. Inverters, definitely. Remote temporary access troubleshooting. Right, networks, yeah, I'm sorry, these are coming in really fast. Zero trust is a really big thing and should already be in place. Zero trust is a very, very big best practice. I believe we've given other talks and published articles on zero trust. It's definitely something that you should be looking into if you haven't already. Battery storage is a big thing. I'm looking forward to a lot more battery storage for sure on the BES, and automation. I feel like automation kind of ties back into AI just a little bit, but I do expect to see a lot more of that as we go on. I think we've petered out. So let's kind of pivot a little bit and talk about certain opportunities with some of these standards. Now, these are things that we've seen issues with when we go and audit. And so I'm just going to highlight a few of these in particular to maybe see what kind of things you could improve on and make sure that you are implementing within your own system. So first we have CIP 5, CIP 7, and CIP 10. Now these are all probably what I would consider the most technical out of all of the CIP standards. And they have a lot of detail associated with them. And so the opportunity there is really that you really should drill down and make sure that you're looking at these requirements in that detail at the implementation level, at the documentation level. It's all something that you really need to focus on because there could be just one little thing that you miss, but that could result in a compliance issue later down the line. Now, this next one here, CIP 11, this is going to be that BCSI, that BES Cyber System Information, particularly in the cloud. Kind of like I talked about earlier, we're moving towards the cloud. This is kind of where we're seeing some opportunities develop. So really what it is how data at rest and in transit is protected. That's kind of where those issues are arising. It's made quite a bit more complicated because as we move towards the cloud, those cloud providers do have access to those servers for maintenance reasons or just because it's on their system. And so there's some things that do need to be considered when you're implementing CIP 11 specifically on the cloud. And then finally, we have CIP 13. The issue that we've been seeing here is really just inadequate risk assessments where the actual risks aren't being effectively evaluated. There's also some problems with documenting implementation that we've seen with CIP 13. If you say you're going to fill out a form as part of the risk assessment, we do expect to be able to see that form on the audit side. Because if we can't see it, then it's very hard to prove that it existed, and there can be issues that arise out of that. CIP 13 is also kind of going into the next slide. Go ahead and get into that one, Thad. This is also going to be an area of focus. So the areas of focus are remote connectivity, supply chain, physical security, and incident response. And these all came out of the 2024 CMEP IP. And just to go ahead and define that really quickly, so CMEP is the Compliance Monitoring and Enforcement Program, so you can think of it as us, the auditors, and IP is the implementation plan. So this is kind of how we're going to audit in a sense, what we're looking at. So these are areas that you're going to really want to focus on when implementing the CIP standards on your organization due to a higher risk of non-compliance or threats affecting these areas specifically. So first we have remote access. This is going to be standards CIP 5, CIP 7, and 12. And really what it is that these standards are in place partially to mitigate the risks associated with poor network hygiene and human error. And the reason why that's important is because poor network hygiene and human error could allow malicious actors to gain unauthorized remote connectivity into your network. And that's probably going to be one of the biggest threats to your network is that remote connectivity aspect. Next up, we have supply chain. This is going to be CIP standards 10 and 13, though really I'd say it goes more on 13. So risks are continuing to grow as the BES continues to grow, and the supply chain continues to be a focal point year after year. SolarWinds and Microsoft Azure compromises in years past really highlight that need for continued scrutiny of the supply chain and to mitigate the risks of allowing other companies' products and services into your network and for your operations. There is definitely a big concern around the supply chain. Next up, we have physical security, specifically the CIP 14's type of physical security for those substations. We have just seen continued ballistic damage, vandalism, arson, and even tampering. This really highlights the need for strong physical security and surveillance of protected systems. And then finally, we have incident response. So this is going for CIP 8. For incidents, I generally think of the potential of an incident just to be a matter of when rather than if, which I think is kind of the opposite of how some people think. But really, hopefully it really never will happen. We do hope that your network's never going to be compromised. There's never going to be an incident. but ultimately we really do need to be prepared for when an incident does happen. Now, this has been an ever-increasing risk, and this will become a little bit more clear as we move on to our next slide. So speaking of those risks, these are some threats that we have seen to the critical infrastructure sectors, and particularly even the electric sector. Now, these alerts are put out by CISA, which CISA is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And each of these should have a link to them in this presentation, but you can also go to cisa.gov and search for these alerts, and they should come up just fine. Now, like I said, all of these threats had to deal with critical infrastructure, but today I'm just really going to focus on this last one here, which is PRC, state-sponsored actors compromise and maintain persistent access to U.S. critical infrastructure, which is a horrible mouthful. But really what this is CISA's alert for Volt Typhoon, which hopefully you've heard of before. This is a state-sponsored cyber operation by China that seeks to infiltrate critical infrastructure systems. Now, their aim is to gain control of end-of-life devices, so devices that are no longer supported or updated, and then infect them with malware to join a botnet to further support their operations. On this alert page, CISA has included some mitigation steps. So if you haven't seen them already, you should definitely go take a look at that. This is a very real and very big threat. I'd also like to give a shout out really quick. We did publish a short article about Volt Typhoon in our March newsletter. That's my coworker Carrick put out. If you haven't subscribed to the Texas RE Review newsletter, you should definitely go and do so at texasre.org. Next slide, please. And so let's really talk about, kind of as we get to the end of this section, about achieving reliability and security. So reliability and security comes in two parts. There is compliance, which we've talked about in the previous slides, and then internal controls. I haven't really talked about internal controls too much as of yet, but they do play a critical component to compliance. And the reason why is the issues that we've seen with compliance that have come up over the years, really you can always tie that back to insufficient internal controls. So let me get into really quick what internal control could be for those that aren't quite aware. Internal controls are basically extra steps outside of compliance that ensure that compliance is being met. So you can think of it as a ticketing system to ensure that multiple people have eyes on, let's say, being able to do your baselines, that multiple people can see that ticket, that you're keeping track of where those baselines are, who's approving these things. That could be an internal control for CIP 10 for compliance. Policy review on a yearly basis, let's see, could also be an internal control. There are some standards that require that. But sometimes your processes change and you want to make sure that's reflected in your documentation. So both of those really go into reliability and security. They're both very important. Next slide. So here we are at our second question. So specifically for internal controls, what are some other internal controls that could be implemented to help ensure compliance with time-based requirements? So I'm not going to get into too specific, but that could be like you have to test your cybersecurity incident response plan every 15 months, or you have to do a vulnerability assessment every 36 calendar months. Calendar reminder is definitely one of those. I will say a little caveat with the calendar reminder. If that is tied to a specific employee, there could be issues that arise with that if that employee leaves or if they're gone, who else has eyes on that calendar reminder? So maybe you want to put that on more company-wide or corporate, or not corporate, excuse me, but a multiple access calendar so more people have visibility of that reminder. ERP, I can't really think of off the top of my head what ERP stands for. I'm so sorry. So I won't be able to respond to that one. Any others? I do know there are some other management systems that will send out calendar reminders. And I have seen in the past ticketing systems, that's kind of what I'm talking about. I have seen in the past instances where if a ticket or a certain event wasn't taken care of within a period of time before the compliance has lapsed, it will start sending emails up the chain to managers and their managers to ensure that that deadline is reached. So that's another kind of example of an internal control, particularly with, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was similar to a ticketing system. Automated reminders. I feel like that kind of goes into calendar reminders. There could be issues with there depending on who's in charge of that, but that's also a really good thing. Continuous monitoring. That could be a really good internal control, depending on how that's implemented. Training is definitely one of them. That kind of starts to tie into CIP 4 a little bit on the training of personnel, but it is good for everybody to understand what is required by the CIP standards. A checklist is really good. Internal audits is a really good internal control to perform, not just for time-based requirements, but I would say just CIP as a whole. To be able to audit yourself before we come in is definitely something that I've seen a lot of benefit from. I think, yeah, we've reached the end. Let me get another drink of water here. Slide. So now I get into what I'm going to call the resources section. These are just a whole bunch of websites or resources that I find are really beneficial. I'll kind of foot stomp it a little bit and I'll continue to say it, but all of these are really, really good. I highly recommend y'all check all of these out. If you get nothing out of this presentation, at least you'll have the resources. This one in particular, this is the EISAC website. This is probably one of the most important websites out there. So in general, this is an information sharing portal for threats and attacks. I believe currently they do have an advisory for Volt Typhoon on their main page, but this is very specific to the electricity sector. Now, this is also where you would report a reportable cybersecurity incident per CIP 8. So again, very, very important website. This is part for your compliance aspect. And I also like to point out just a few things here. You should definitely join the EISAC if you haven't done so already. It's a really great organization, a lot of good benefit from this. Another thing is GridSecCon, or Grid Security Convention. I believe it's going to be held in October in Minnesota this year. Last year it was held in Canada. I did see the kind of agenda that's going on, all the talks that's happening, a lot of really great information, a lot of really great presenters. Definitely try to send at least somebody out there if you can. Really, really good information. And then finally, we have GridX. Now, this is an industry event that y'all should definitely join. Basically, what it does is they run through and facilitate a cybersecurity incident. I believe it's several cybersecurity incidents, different kinds. And then what this allows you to do is to be able to test your cybersecurity incident plan against GridX. And you can use that as part of your CIP 8's requirement to test your cybersecurity incident response plan. And next slide, please. So now we have the NERC one-stop shop. I highly recommend using the link. For the life of me, I still have not been able to find this particular page from their main homepage. I keep on getting stuck at, there is another link called One Stop Shop that leads you to an Excel file that just has the list of past and current CIP standards, or not CIP standards, excuse me, just all of the NERC standards listed out. So you can get hung up on there. I definitely recommend using the link for this one. But basically what this is just a good compilation of different resources that you can use for your own compliance programs. They have a lot of compliance guidance on here. They have a lot of implementation guidance. So that's how you can implement these on your own, in your own policies. They have really good internal control sections. They have links to NIST. It's just a really good place to kind of start. Next slide, please. And so I mentioned NIST just for a second there. So NIST is the National Institute of Security and Technology. And this is their page for the 800-53. This is a really great resource. This is our main source of information. And I really mean it when I say it is the main source that we look from for internal controls and the best practices perspective. This is our foundation. NIST in general is the foundation for cybersecurity protections. Definitely something you should be familiar with. If you aren't already, definitely go check out their sites. They do have a catalog of controls here, so definitely another resource that you can use to implement internal controls on your own organization. Next slide, please. And next up we have, this is from ERCOT's website. So if you're a part of ERCOT, this is definitely something you'll want to be looking at. This is for CIPWIG, or the Critical Infrastructure Protection Working Group. If you aren't already part of them, I really do recommend you join. We did have our last meeting just last Friday. This is hosted virtually and in person, and what it has, there's an open section and a closed section. Texas RE does participate in the open section, and it's a really good place for you to talk about compliance and the standards. If you have any questions, it's just a really good place to ask those questions and converse amongst yourselves. Next slide, please. And now we have on to the Texas RE page. This is our compliance page, which you can get to by clicking the compliance tab. We just have some resources specifically for our engagements. So you can kind of see, and I'll highlight these in particular. If you look towards the top of those documents, you have the CIP evidence request tool, or the ERT, as well as the user guide. These are both really good to go ahead and take a look at before you start an engagement, specifically if they're going to be CIP standards in scope for that. That's what we use to do our sampling off of, and it's just really good to go ahead and be familiar with those before that engagement starts. Some other things is the generator welcome package if you're just getting started here in ERCOT. We also have the self-certification process and information certification documents. It's also really good stuff. Our common questions document is fantastic. When we start an audit, this is kind of where we base a lot of our questions off of, and it might give you a good idea of what we're looking for when we start an engagement. Next slide, please. And then here's our resource hub. Now, I realize I've given you a whole bunch of resources, and some of those resources were other resource hubs, but this one is particularly good. I had to cut a lot of these pages out of this presentation just for time, but I've highlighted those specific ones there if you see them next to that red star. And so I'll just go through a few of these. The electric disturbance events, or DOE 417 form, that's the second star. That's a really good resource, kind of similar to EISAC. You can use that form to report for a reportable cybersecurity incident. They also have a few other functions that you can use that form for as well. Another one's going to be FedRAMP, that third star, particularly the documents and templates section. And for some background, FedRAMP is a site essentially, and what they do is they audit cloud providers against the NIST standards to ensure compliance with NIST. And what you can do is you can download some of their documents and templates and see what they're assessing these cloud providers on, and then possibly implement that into your own policies and procedures. And then finally, we also do have the MITRE, I hope I'm saying that correctly, Adversarial Tactics, Techniques, and Common Knowledge, or ATT&CK matrices. And what they do is they've basically created a database of attacks and threats that they have seen, and it details how those attacks are performed and possible mitigations. And what you can do is take a look, because this is things that attackers really do use in real life. And then from there, you can create controls on your own systems on how to mitigate the risks associated with that. Next slide. And now we're here at the end of this presentation, and I really want to reiterate that we are all in this together. You'll see some of these other reliability entities here. You have RF, Texas RE, WEC, NPCC, MRO, CIRC. These are all entities that come together and collaborate to ensure that we do have a highly reliable and secure bulk power system. And a little bit farther than that, I do want to iterate, it can be kind of adversarial between an auditor and the auditees or entities, but I really do want to reiterate, we are all here to collaborate and make sure that we do have that highly reliable and secure bulk power system. We're not here to get a finding, to cause y'all stress. I'm sure it is stressful to be on an engagement, but we're here to ensure that the lights stay on and that we all have power. Next slide. And here we are at the end of the slide. I want to reiterate, I'm Rebecca Barber. You can reach out to me if you would like at rebecca.barber@texasrea.org. But if you do have any questions on this presentation, any of the CIP standards, you can go to cip@texasre.org and email us there. And that's just going to ensure that you do get a response to any questions that you may have. Next slide. With that, thank you all so much for attending this presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you to the audience for bearing with us through that short technical interruption that we had earlier. Right now, the lines are open. If you have any questions, go to slido.com using the code TXRE. Go ahead and put your question in. Rebecca, while we wait for the audience to enter any questions, do you have any maybe closing statements that you'd like to leave them with?
I feel like I gave my closing statement there, but again, definitely go check out the other Reliability 101 and especially the 201 presentations, just a wealth of information. We do a whole bunch of these talks over the course of the year, and it's just a ton of information. It's very, very helpful. So please go check those out. I do know my coworkers have worked very hard on preparing for these.
Well, thanks, Rebecca. You gave my closing statement.
So sorry, Thad.
That's quite all right. We still don't have any questions, so you might get off easy here today, Rebecca. Folks, if you think of any questions later on tonight, you're rolling around in bed thinking, God, I wish I'd asked that. You can contact Rebecca directly at rebecca.barber@texasre.org. You can contact the compliance department at compliance@texasre.org, or you can send any general questions to information@texasre.org. Just a reminder, tomorrow's event is going to be the O&P flip side of this one. It's going to be an introduction to operations and planning programs. So do be sure to catch us for that. And like she said, be sure to check out all of our upcoming presentations. Our colleagues here put a lot of effort into these, and we want to make sure that y'all are as up to date as possible on these important topics. So there is a link to the presentation. It is currently in chat. If you scroll down to the bottom on TechStary's training page to the archived presentations, it'll be right there, and we'll get the recording up as soon as we can. And Rebecca, while I was talking, we actually had some questions come in. I'm so sorry.
That's quite all right. Are they posted in chat or, oh, there we go. Newly registered generator operators to use as guideline to prepare. I can't give you too much of a specific answer. I can just say that it is a really good resource for newly registered generators. I do believe they do have some guidelines on preparation there, but it just contains a good amount of information as you get started here within ERCOT.
Rebecca, we just had our manager of CIP compliance, Devin Kitchens, chime in. You can find one of those templates in the generator welcome packet, I believe is what he told us.
Yeah, I think they're referring to the generator welcome packet, but yeah, you can use it as a guideline to prepare.
All right, well, I think that does it for us today. Folks, thanks again. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you tomorrow.
you.